If you are working hard but still broke, the problem is not your effort, it is not your discipline, and it is definitely not your potential. But if you are here looking for easy success, motivation, or some shortcut that will change your life without changing your habits, you can leave this video right now. Because this is not that kind of content. This is for people who are ready to understand something most never will: why hard work alone is not enough, and why most people stay financially stuck no matter how much they earn. So if you are still here, we begin. Why hard work is not enough. Most people are taught one simple idea from childhood: work hard and you will succeed. And at first glance, this makes sense, because effort should lead to results. But when it comes to money, reality does not work in such a direct way. Hard work alone does not guarantee financial progress. In fact, in many cases, hard work without structure leads to exhaustion, not freedom. Because the system most people operate in is not designed to reward effort equally. It is designed to reward position, leverage, and structure. This is why two people can work equally hard, yet end up in completely different financial situations. One builds control over their time and income. The other remains dependent on constant effort just to maintain stability. And over time, this difference becomes massive. Not because one person works harder than the other, but because one person unknowingly builds within a system that compounds, and the other does not. Most people never see this distinction clearly. They assume more effort is the answer. But effort without direction is just movement, and movement is not progress. It is just energy being spent without accumulation. And this is where most financial frustration begins. The time for money trap. The most common financial system most people live inside is extremely simple. Time equals money. You work an hour, you get paid for an hour. You work more hours, you earn more money. On the surface, this seems fair, but the problem is not fairness. The problem is limitation, because time is finite, and anything tied directly to time is also finite. This creates a ceiling that most people never consciously recognize. At first, it does not feel like a limitation, because early progress feels fast. But eventually, every system that depends on time reaches saturation. There are only so many hours you can sell, and only so much income those hours can generate. This is where people begin to feel stuck. Not because they are not working enough, but because they have reached the limits of the system they are inside. And most never question whether a different system exists. They only try to increase effort inside the same structure. But structure is what defines outcome, not effort alone. The middle class trap. At some point, most people begin to believe they are progressing financially simply because their income increases over time. A better job, a higher salary, a promotion, a new opportunity. On the surface, these changes feel like progress, and in many ways they are improvements in comfort and stability. But there is a deeper pattern that most people never notice. Because while income increases, lifestyle adjusts at the same speed, and this adjustment is not accidental, it is automatic. The human mind naturally adapts to new levels of comfort very quickly. What once felt like luxury becomes normal. What once felt unnecessary becomes essential. And slowly, without realizing it, every increase in income gets absorbed by an increase in lifestyle expectations. This is what creates the middle class trap, not a lack of income, but a lack of financial separation between earning and spending. Because in the middle class structure, money does not accumulate in a meaningful way, it circulates. It enters through income and exits through consumption almost immediately. Higher income does not solve this problem, it only scales it. More money simply leads to more expensive habits, more expensive choices, and more expensive definitions of what normal life looks like. And because of this, financial position remains relatively unchanged over long periods of time, even decades. This is why many people feel like they are working harder every year, but not actually getting closer to freedom. They are moving inside the same structure, just at a larger scale. The illusion of progress comes from increased activity, not increased independence. And this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of financial life. People assume that effort over time automatically leads to freedom. But if effort is continuously recycled into consumption, then no structural change ever occurs. The system remains intact, only the scale changes. The real issue is not how much money is earned, it is how little of it is removed from immediate circulation. Because without separation between income and spending, there is no accumulation, and without accumulation, there is no path toward independence. The middle class is not defined by income level. It is defined by financial flow. Money flows in and out, but rarely stays long enough to create transformation. And this creates a psychological effect, a feeling of being busy, stable, and functional, but not free, not progressing in a structural sense, just maintaining a life that requires continuous input to sustain. And this is why so many people feel trapped without understanding why. Because on paper, everything looks fine. Income is stable, life is manageable, responsibilities are handled, but internally there is a sense that something is missing. That sense is not random, it is the awareness of a system that does not create exit, only repetition. And until that pattern is interrupted, financial life remains predictable but limited. Why income increase doesn't change your life. One of the most misunderstood ideas in personal finance is the belief that earning more money will automatically solve financial problems. In reality, this is only partially true. Higher income can improve quality of life. It can reduce stress. It can increase access to opportunities, but it does not automatically create financial freedom. Because freedom is not determined by income size, it is determined by dependency. If your lifestyle depends entirely on your active income, then even a high salary does not change your fundamental position. You are still inside the same structure, just operating at a higher level of expense and responsibility. This is why many high earners still feel financially insecure, because their expenses rise with their income, not randomly but consistently. As income increases, so do expectations, commitments, and lifestyle standards. Housing becomes more expensive, transportation becomes more comfortable, food becomes higher quality, entertainment becomes more frequent, and each of these changes feels justified individually, but collectively they rebuild the same financial dependency at a higher cost. This process is extremely subtle because there is no moment where it feels like a mistake, it feels like improvement. But structurally, nothing changes. The distance between income and expenses remains small, and without that distance, financial independence cannot develop because independence requires surplus, not just income. Surplus is what remains after all necessary spending is covered, and that surplus is what creates the ability to build, invest, and accumulate over time. Without surplus, every dollar is already assigned before it arrives, and when money is fully assigned, it cannot be used for transformation. It can only maintain existing conditions. This is why financial progress often feels invisible even when income increases, because the system absorbs everything, and the individual remains inside the same cycle of earning and spending, just at a higher intensity. The real shift begins when income is no longer immediately consumed, when a portion of it is deliberately separated from lifestyle expansion, not for saving alone, but for building structure, because structure is what creates independence over time. Without structure, income is temporary. With structure, income becomes directional. And direction is what eventually determines whether a person remains dependent or becomes independent. Most people never reach this stage of thinking because they are focused on improving income, not redesigning flow. But financial freedom does not come from earning more, it comes from changing how money behaves after it is earned. And that change begins with awareness of where every increase actually goes. Because until that awareness exists, the system continues exactly as it is. Money psychology, why people self sabotage financially. At a certain point, financial struggle stops being purely mathematical. It stops being about income, expenses, or opportunity, and starts becoming psychological. Because even when people are given better financial conditions, many of them still repeat the same patterns that keep them stuck. This is where the deeper layer of money begins, not the external system, but the internal one. Most people believe they make financial decisions logically, but in reality, a large portion of financial behavior is emotional. People do not spend money only because they need something, they spend because of stress, because of boredom, because of pressure, because of comparison, because of identity. And this is why financial improvement is not just about earning more, it is about changing the internal triggers that control financial decisions. For many people, money becomes a way to regulate emotion. A stressful day leads to spending. A feeling of lack leads to buying. A moment of frustration leads to impulse decisions. And over time, these patterns become automatic, not consciously chosen, but repeatedly reinforced. This is why even people with higher income levels often find themselves in the same financial position mentally, even if the numbers are different, Because the behavior behind the numbers has not changed, and behavior is what actually determines financial outcomes over time. One of the most important but least discussed aspects of financial literacy is self sabotage, not in a dramatic sense, but in subtle, everyday actions that slowly undermine long term goals. For example, a person may decide to save money, but then gradually adjust their spending upward whenever income increases, or they may set a goal to invest, but delay it repeatedly because immediate spending feels more rewarding in the moment, or they may understand what needs to be done logically, but fail to execute consistently due to emotional resistance. This gap between knowledge and behavior is where most financial failure exists, not in ignorance, but in inconsistency. And inconsistency is usually not caused by lack of discipline alone. It is caused by internal conflict, a conflict between short term emotional relief and long term structural benefit. And in most cases, short term relief wins because it is immediate, while long term benefit requires patience. This is why financial change is not just about strategy, it is about identity, because people do not consistently act against their identity for long periods of time. If someone identifies as a spender, saving will always feel unnatural. If someone identifies as someone who enjoys life now, long term discipline will feel like restriction. If someone identifies as someone who struggles with money, they will unconsciously recreate that struggle even when conditions improve. This is the hidden layer most financial advice ignores. It focuses on what to do, but not on who the person believes they are. And without identity change, behavior eventually returns to its default state. This is why financial progress often feels temporary for many people. They make improvements for a short period of time, then slowly revert back to previous patterns, not because they lack knowledge, but because their internal identity has not changed. And identity is stronger than intention, so real financial transformation does not begin with external change. It begins with internal alignment, the point where financial decisions are no longer battles between discipline and impulse, but natural expressions of a new way of thinking. Until that shift happens, financial behavior will always remain unstable, and stability is the foundation of all long term financial progress. Discipline failure and emotional spending. Most people think their financial problems come from external limitations: low income, lack of opportunities, unfair systems, bad timing. But over time, a deeper pattern becomes visible. Many people who already know what to do financially still do not do it consistently. They understand saving is important, they understand investing is necessary, they understand that lifestyle inflation is dangerous, they understand discipline is required, and yet their behavior does not match their knowledge. This is where financial failure becomes less about information and more about execution. And execution is not a matter of intelligence, it is a matter of control over impulses in real time. Because in theory, most financial decisions are simple, but in practice, they are emotional. Discipline breaks not because people do not understand the right action, but because the emotional weight of the present moment overrides the logic of the future. A future benefit always feels abstract compared to a present desire, and the brain naturally prioritizes what is immediate. This is not a moral weakness, it is a psychological mechanism, but it creates predictable financial outcomes. When emotional impulses are repeatedly prioritized over long term structure, financial progress becomes inconsistent, and inconsistency destroys compounding. Because compounding requires continuity, not perfection, but sustained direction over time. Most people underestimate how often small financial decisions interrupt that continuity. Not big failures, but small deviations. A purchase here, a delay there, a justification in the moment. Each one seems harmless individually, but collectively, they weaken the structure that is supposed to build long term stability. This is why financial discipline is not about extreme restriction, it is about awareness of micro decisions. Because financial outcomes are not determined by occasional big choices, they are determined by repeated small ones. And the hardest part is that these small decisions often feel justified. They feel reasonable, they feel earned, they feel necessary, and because of that, they are rarely questioned. This is where discipline becomes more than behavior, it becomes observation. The ability to notice when a decision is driven by logic versus when it is driven by emotion. And most people never develop this awareness consistently, they operate on autopilot, reacting to circumstances instead of intentionally directing outcomes. And autopilot behavior always follows the path of least resistance, which is usually consumption over accumulation, short term relief over long term structure, immediate satisfaction over delayed benefit. And when this pattern repeats over years, it creates a financial reality that feels difficult to escape. Not because escape is impossible, but because the internal habits reinforcing the system are constantly active. This is why financial change often feels difficult even when the solution is known. Because knowing is not the limiting factor, control in the moment is. And control requires interruption of automatic behavior, not once, but repeatedly, until new patterns become stronger than old ones. This is the point where discipline stops being a concept and becomes a practiced identity. Someone who no longer negotiates with impulses in the same way. Someone who does not rely on motivation to make correct decisions, but operates from structure instead of emotion. And this shift is what separates temporary financial improvement from lasting financial transformation. Because without discipline at the moment of decision, no strategy survives contact with real life. And this is why most people remain financially stuck even when they understand everything logically. Understanding is not the problem. Execution under emotional pressure is. Wealth system and leverage. At some point in understanding money, there is a critical shift that separates people who remain stuck from those who begin to move forward in a different direction. It is the shift from thinking in terms of effort to thinking in terms of leverage. Most people are taught that income is the result of work. More work equals more money. More hours equals more results. More effort equals more success. And while this is partially true in the short term, it is not how wealth is actually built. Because effort alone does not scale. Time does not scale. Energy does not scale. Human attention does not scale indefinitely. But leverage does. Leverage is the ability to multiply output without multiplying input at the same rate. And this is where financial reality begins to split into two different models of thinking. The first model is linear. You work, you get paid, you repeat. The second model is exponential. You build something once and it continues producing value beyond your direct involvement. Most people never transition from the first model to the second, not because it is impossible, but because they never stop long enough to question the system they are in. They remain focused on increasing income within a linear structure instead of building systems that create nonlinear outcomes. And this is why even hardworking individuals often feel financially limited, because they are optimizing inside a system that has a built in ceiling. Leverage removes that ceiling, but leverage requires a different mindset entirely. It requires thinking beyond immediate output. It requires delayed gratification at a structural level. It requires building something that does not pay off instantly, but compounds over time. This can take many forms. It can be knowledge that increases in value as it is applied repeatedly. It can be systems that operate independently of constant effort. It can be skills that scale beyond direct time for money exchange. But regardless of the form, the principle is the same. You are no longer the source of value, you become the creator of systems that generate value. This shift is uncomfortable for most people because it introduces uncertainty in the short term. Linear effort provides immediate feedback. You work, you get paid. Leverage does not. Leverage often feels like nothing is happening at the beginning. You put in effort without immediate reward. You build without immediate validation. You create without immediate results. And because of that, most people abandon it early. They return to linear thinking because it feels safer and more predictable. But predictability is not the same as progress, and safety is not the same as freedom. The real separation between financial levels is not how hard people work. It is whether they are building within a system that multiplies their effort or one that limits it. And this distinction is rarely visible in the beginning. It only becomes clear over time, when the results of compounding start to show, and one group remains in the same position they started from, while another begins to see exponential differences in outcome, not because they worked more, but because their work was structured differently. And once you understand this, your definition of productivity begins to change. Productivity is no longer about how much you do in a day. It becomes about how much your actions continue to produce after the day is over. And that is where real financial transformation begins. Wealth system, identity shift, exit from broke cycle. At this stage of understanding money, something important becomes clear. Financial freedom is not a single decision. It is not a moment where everything suddenly changes. It is not a breakthrough that happens overnight. It is the result of systems that are built, maintained, and repeated over time. And most people never reach this level of thinking because they remain focused on outcomes instead of structures. They ask how to make more money, but they rarely ask what kind of system produces money consistently without increasing dependence on their time. This is where the concept of financial structure becomes essential, because structure is what determines whether income leads to freedom or simply more complexity. Without structure, income is unstable. It flows in and out without direction. It increases comfort temporarily, but does not change long term position. With structure, income becomes controlled. It is allocated intentionally. It is divided into purposes. It is separated into categories that serve different long term functions. And over time, this creates distance between earning and spending. That distance is what most people never build, because without distance, there is no accumulation. And without accumulation, there is no independence. Most people operate in a system where money is treated as immediate utility. It arrives, it is used, and it disappears. There is no pause in the flow, no intentional separation, no system guiding its movement. And because of this, financial life becomes reactive instead of intentional. Structure changes that. It introduces a framework where money is no longer just consumed, but directed. Part of it is used for survival, part of it is used for stability, and part of it is intentionally preserved or allocated for future growth. This separation is not about restriction, it is about clarity, because when money is not structured, decisions are made in emotional moments. But when structure exists, decisions are guided by predefined logic instead of impulse. And this reduces inconsistency, which is one of the main reasons people remain financially stagnant, because inconsistency breaks progress faster than lack of income ever could. Even small disruptions in financial behavior, repeated over time, are enough to cancel long term growth. This is why structure is more important than income level. A structured lower income can outperform an unstructured higher income over time, because structure ensures that progress continues regardless of emotional fluctuations. And this is where the mindset begins to shift again. You stop thinking like someone trying to improve income and start thinking like someone designing a system that governs money flow. This is a completely different level of awareness, because now the focus is not on effort, it is on architecture, how money enters, how it moves, how it is retained, and how it is reinvested into future capacity. Once this shift happens, financial decisions become less chaotic, they become predictable. And predictability is what creates long term control. Because control is not about eliminating uncertainty, it is about designing systems that function even in the presence of uncertainty. And this is the foundation of financial independence, not earning more in a single moment, but building a structure that continues to operate over time, regardless of fluctuations in motivation, regardless of external conditions, regardless of emotional states. And once you reach this understanding, financial behavior becomes more stable, because it is no longer driven by moment to moment decisions. It is driven by a system that already exists before the decision is made. Everything you have heard in this video comes down to a few simple but uncomfortable truths. Most people are not stuck because they lack intelligence. They are not stuck because they lack opportunity. And they are not stuck because they are incapable of change. They are stuck because their understanding of money, discipline, and structure has never evolved beyond the basic system they were taught: work, earn, spend, repeat. And as long as that cycle remains unbroken, financial outcomes will remain predictable. Not necessarily because life is unfair, but because the system is consistent. If nothing in the structure changes, nothing in the outcome will change either. This is why financial freedom is not a mystery. It is not luck, it is not timing. It is the result of changing how money flows through your life, from uncontrolled flow to structured allocation, from emotional decisions to system based decisions, from short term reaction to long term design. And this is the point most people miss. They focus on earning more instead of building differently. They focus on income instead of structure. They focus on effort instead of leverage. But real financial change begins when you stop asking how to work harder and start asking how to build a system that works without constant effort. Because that is the real separation between financial struggle and financial independence. Not motivation, not talent, but structure and consistency over time. Now, if you are still here, it means you are not just looking for entertainment, you are looking for understanding. And that already puts you ahead of most people. Because awareness is the first step that actually leads to change. But awareness alone is not enough. It must turn into action. Even small changes in how you think about money, how you spend it, and how you structure it can completely change your trajectory over time. Not immediately, but inevitably. Because what you repeat becomes your financial reality. If this video made you think differently, consider subscribing. This channel is built for people who are serious about understanding money, discipline, and long-term success. And if you want to continue this journey, you can watch the next videos on the channel where we go even deeper into mindset, financial literacy, and building a life with structure instead of chaos. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.